Episode 115 of The Balancing Act. Got a very special guest, Mr. Len May, author of Making Cannabis Personal. Len, before we get into what's in the book, I'd like to start with your origin story. Where'd you grow up and what were you into as a kid? What was your parents' or your guardian's view of cannabis? And then what led you into this work?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. Uh, so I was born in Lithuania, under the Soviet Union, and my parents immigrated here with me, obviously when I was about 6 years old. So I had to learn the language. I mean, as a kid, it wasn't that difficult, but I remember, it's a little bit of a struggle. And then when I got the hang of it, I would sit in class, the teacher would call me, and my mind would be elsewhere. I wasn't really paying attention unless something really, really like grabbed me or stimulated me. So, I became maybe disruptive a few years in because I wasn't really paying attention. I was talking, it was mostly talking, and I would get in trouble. And it was just like this perpetual thing. And I constantly would get in trouble for talking, not paying attention, being disruptive. And my parents would be called in. So they said, hey, maybe there's something that's going on with them. So they started taking me to some doctors, and I got diagnosed with ADD. So at that point, there was ADD and ADHD. If you're hyperactive, you have a different diagnosis. Now it's all under one umbrella. I wasn't the hyperactive kid. I was sort of the daydreamer kid. And they put me on prescription medication. And, prescription medication like Ritalin and some of those, I can't say it didn't work. It depends how you define work. What I would say is it actually removed my sense of self and any feeling that I had. So it disconnected me. There's no like happiness. You're not happy about things. You're not sad about things. You're just kind of going and coasting. It's a Groundhog Day all the time. And I was going to school and then met some older kids I was hanging out with. And I think it was ninth grade, if I'm not mistaken. But I said, hey, do you want to smoke a cigarette? I was like, oh man, I'm one of the cool kids. I get to smoke a cigarette back then. Smoking was cool and whatever. I'm like, yeah, sure. Never asked them. Well, they had one cigarette and they passed it around, took a drag of it. Like, didn't taste like a cigarette the way I remember. Took another drag. They were laughing at me. I'm like, what's up? They put cannabis inside the cigarette. So when I went back to class, the windows that were open in my brain sort of narrowed and I could focus. I never said anything to anybody, but cannabis was highly legal at that time. So I would try to obtain cannabis as often as I possibly could in all kinds of different ways. And I stopped taking prescription medication. Uh, from time to time, my parents would catch me and I would get in trouble, grounded, and all kinds of different things. But I still continued. And at one point, when I was around 17, my dad's like, I'm giving up. Don't bring it in the house. I don't want it in the house. I don't care what you do. Don't bring it in the house. Okay. So I had a car. I had like a little pouch, and I had like a little bit of some there were some bowls, whatever papers, and I put it in a pouch underneath my front seat. So I remember I was out, a big idea. I was clubbing, then we went fishing at night. I don't know. I got home like towards the morning. I slept till the afternoon. I go downstairs. My parents are sitting there on the kitchen table with my pouch on the kitchen table. Like, what's up with that? They said, I told you not to bring it in the house. And I said, it wasn't in the house. It was in my car. Well, that's still my property. What are we going to do with you? And I'm like, I don't give a fuck what you can do, whatever, whatever. So we're going to call the cops. What will they do? I'm like, call the cops. I'm not going to do anything. So they did. They called the cops. Two female officers came in and they were like, this is not a lot, but if we're going to throw it out, we're going to have you arrested. I said, all right, fine, go ahead. Like, oh, it's a waste of our time. And he goes, if it was my son, I would kick him to the curb. And so they left. My dad said, you have 5 minutes, go get your stuff. So I got a suitcase and he literally kicked me out the door. So that was my journey. Now, irony is My parents talk to my dad every day now. My parents consume products and my company has patents on for their conditions. So it came full circle and now they're proud. But at that point, that was my origin story.
That's amazing. Yeah, I know you owned a couple of dispensaries, and then you got into the genetics and genetics work in terms of the cannabis plant specifically. At some point while you were doing the genetics work in the cannabis industry, you had an epiphany or some sort of moment where you felt like you needed to look more into the dynamic between each person's individual uh, genome and the plant that they're consuming's genome, and that there's actually it's the dynamic between the two that allows us to dial into what the effects are going to be more so than just the genetics of the cannabis.
But I never really understood cannabis per se. Like we always talk about cannabis and marijuana and whatever you want to call it as this is this plant that does all this stuff. And what I think people don't understand is we have this endocannabinoid system and how the plant or anything else that you consume as a ligand, how it interacts with our own bodies and our systems. That's the reaction. That's the response. So we're always pointing fingers. And, through my journey, as my homeless journey, my couch surfing journey, going to college, like starting a company, exiting out of that, going to corporate. I was still consuming cannabis the whole time. But there was one incident that really, really kind of illuminated me. So I was consuming cannabis for my ADHD, and I became the president, and we can go into that if you want. I became the president of the Cannabis Action Network. So I was at a concert basically called the Horde Festival. It was a festival, and these guys and girls were standing there with a big sign called Cannabis Action Network. I'm like, awesome, man. What are you guys doing? Like, oh, we're registering people to vote. I'm like, well, I'm already registered to vote. What else you got? We got some pamphlets. I'm like, what else you got? So I became the president of the Cannabis Action Network,
Mhm.
and I held a rally at Independence Hall. I think it was 1993, 94, somewhere around there. So Independence Hall in Philly, I held a rally for legalization and bans and all this other stuff. And we held it at the right near where the Constitution and Declaration of Independence are. And my keynote speaker was this woman named Elvie Masika. And Elvie was one of the first people to get prescribed federal cannabis under the NIDA program in her metal jar with rolled joints with whatever seeds in them and a USDA label. And she lit up a joint in front of these federal rangers. And I was like, man, this is unbelievable what's happening. They can't do anything. It's legal. I'm like, oh, it's going to be legalized around the corner. It's 1993. It was not for a long time. So we got back to my house. Everybody crashed to my house. And my girlfriend at the time, she was an artist. She made this big sculpture we had in the house. Everybody's sleeping. And then we got woken up to a loud noise, crash. I was like, oh, shit. So LV walked into a sculpture that we had and broke it. She felt really bad. But LV had degenerative glaucoma. She was blind, like really thick glass. She was blind, pretty blind until she consumed cannabis, which was her medicine. That's what she was getting prescribed for. So that was my first sort of moment of, well, wait a second. I'm consuming cannabis for my ADHD or my ADD. She's consuming cannabis for her glaucoma. Well, why is it working for her condition? It's working for me for my condition. What's different about the plant? What so I started digging into the endocannabinoid system, and that really started my journey. So all the time I was researching, I was studying, I was reading everything I could possibly do, and I was still going corporate. I had my businesses. I exited out of, and until I moved from Philly to LA in 2009, 2010. That's when I got into the dispensary business. So, once again, wasn't I was just open to opportunity. The opportunity came. We ended up opening up uh, four more dispensaries after we opened the first one called Kush Kingdom. They were all under the same brand. But I started seeing two people will consume the same varietal of cannabis and have a completely different experience. And this sort of what you just brought up about, like, guiding people and sequencing the plant, it happened because one of the guys who was one of my partners, he was wanted to consume some cannabis. And he goes, "So what do you have?" And I said, "This is kind of sativa or sativa dominant." I didn't have the terminology to explain everything, just what was on the packaging at the time. Nobody was testing anything. So I said, "Yeah, sativa." He goes, "Nah, that stuff puts me to sleep." I said, "Nah, sativa, man. What do you mean? Indica on the couch. That's what I learned." He goes, "Nah, not for me." I was like, "That's interesting." So there's another one. So I started researching. I found a video of this guy, Kevin McKernan, doing genetic sequencing of the plant. And so I got into the plant genetics, and I could start seeing that we're naming this plant all these names, but they're not relevant. They have nothing to do with the makeup of the plant. And how do we even know that that really is what we're putting in our bodies? So when I took 5 blue dreams and I would genetically sequence 5 blue dreams, we call it something blue dream. We also have Alaskan Thunderfuck and all these other names that Grandma Mary would never buy in a dispensary, but that's our industry created all that. Fine. Uh, but when I look at them, the first two that I sequenced were close to Blue Dream. So there's a little bit of variation, but they were close. The other two had some Blue Dream in them, but were not Blue Dream. And then the fifth one was just a labeled Blue Dream, not even close. There was no Blue Dream genetics in there. So I was like, all right, we have to get this nomenclature, we have to get this understanding correct for the people so they know what they put in their bodies. But as you mentioned, the parent company of this company that I was consulting with, they were doing pharmacogenomics, so testing individuals and how drugs affect individual bodies and contraindications between drugs. So I really started getting into the human genetics side. And that's when, I had my other aha light bulb moment. We have plant genetics here, we have human genetics here. Let's bring those two together and guide people to a more personalized experience. They weren't interested in the human side, shut it down. So got some smart people with me and launched Endocannabinoid, or now it's called EndoDNA, but at that time it was Endocannabinoid Health in 2017.
Are your choices rooted in purpose, or are you running on autopilot? Modern science has proven mindset directly affects physical health. The story you're telling yourself right now is literally wiring your nervous system. At Canna Clarity, I use reverent cannabis guidance to amplify your awareness and dissolve the limiting agreements hiding deep in your subconscious programming. Rewrite your story, rewire your biology. Book your free call today at canna-clarity.com. And what are the most common ailments or issues that you find people looking to treat with cannabis?
I think the most common things that people want to treat with cannabis are anything that's inflammatory. So pain is probably the biggest one: pain, discomfort. And I'm just going to preface this by saying we have patents on formulations, like 8 of them, and I can tell you what people are also leaning towards. So those formulations associated with pain and inflammation. The second will be sleep, and the third would be focus or cognitive or something of that nature, where they can have some mental clarity. It's probably a tie between that and stress and anxiety, but they're sort of related
Right.
to each. So those would probably be the conditions. But it's the root cause of all these things that's the challenge. Because when people talk about pain, well, pain is a signal, and pain can be a signal that has nothing to do with an injury. It has nothing to do with an acute condition. It can be chronic over time. Our symptom is pain. So I'll give you sort of an example where your genetics play a role in how cannabis is involved in the endocannabinoid system, all that. And if you want me to dive into any of the endocannabinoid system, how it works and all that, I can do that as well. But you have this amazing system. And if I'm walking down the street and a car comes out of nowhere and almost hits me, I'm going to have this fight or flight expression. So, or freeze, I guess. So all these neurochemicals are going to be pumped into my bloodstream. I'm going to have some adrenaline, some dopamine, some converted norepinephrine, cortisol. Now it's pumped in my bloodstream. And when my brain realizes I'm safe, there's no lion chasing me, the car is gone, I feel calm, there's something that happens. So there's a reuptake of those neurochemicals, and our brain releases new neurochemicals, and they happen to be endogenous, meaning that we produce them ourselves, endogenous endocannabinoids. And the two that we release from the amygdala part of the brain are anandamide, and the word ananda means bliss. So, I'm sure your audience is familiar with that. And then the second one is 2-AG. So when we're releasing those, then our endocannabinoid system is modulating the other systems and getting us back into homeostasis or balance. But some of the challenges are genetics. So when you were talking about conditions, well, that condition is, as I said, pain and inflammation. But if you have a gene, for example, and I like to use this example because everybody can relate to this gene called FAAH, fatty acid amide hydrolase. It produces an enzyme that actually breaks down or metabolizes anandamide. So you may be producing or keeping less anandamide than the average person. So because of your genotype. So if that is the case, then your cortisol level that you just secreted may stay longer in your bloodstream. If that stays longer in your bloodstream, your immune system can overreact to that. So it'll draw a bunch of blood, a bunch of your immune soldiers to that area to be able to address that inflammation because you have extra cortisol. Now you're feeling pain and discomfort, and it's in your joints, maybe it's in your neck, back, ankles, knees, elbows, etc. And if you have predispositions to gut health issues, it can trigger IBD, IBS, colitis, all these different things. But you're treating the pain. So if you're going to a doctor, you're saying, "Hey, doc, my knee hurts, my elbow hurts, I'm feeling some pain." Well, what can you do about it? Well, I'll give you an analgesic. I'll give you either over the counter, I'll give you a prescription analgesic, I'll give you an injection for that or a pill. But you didn't do anything to follow along of why that happened. Well, it happened because I was stressed. It didn't happen because I hurt myself in any way. So this is where phytocannabinoids are a great way to be able to address the root cause of what's happening with that inflammation. So CBD can act as an anti-inflammatory, while delta-9 THC can act as an analgesic to alleviate the feeling of the pain. And when they work in concert together, now you can get back to homeostasis.
Yeah, I wanted to go a little bit deeper on CBD itself. Personally, the more I've learned about, the interaction or the, I guess, potentiating effect between THC and CBD and the unique aspect in that, psychoactively, CBD actually mitigates the intoxicating effect of THC. But when you're talking about your empathetic or your body itself, they work to potentiate that pain, that autonomic nervous system modulation that you were just mentioning. And so they work, like you said, in concert to get even more pain relief from, like you're talking about, the root cause of it. But the reason I want to focus a little bit more on CBD is because as somebody that had a very amazing experience with cannabis from the first time I felt that intoxication or high, and I really felt like a spiritual, like cannabis chose me in a lot of ways, and just the connection to the earth. And, that's when I started expanding my consciousness and philosophy into recognizing that, at least I recognize that the earth itself is alive and conscious, and all of these aspects that are, I guess, more spiritual and less scientific, so to speak. But reading your book, helped me to realize that a lot of these people that aren't having such great effects with cannabis, it's not that they're not being real with themselves, as maybe my ego might have tried to convince me at one time, but their genetics are just not set up for high dose THC. These same people can, however, still benefit from this plant. This plant truly is for everyone. And the way that we commonly understand weed or marijuana or cannabis, it are the buds that are typically higher in THC that people smoke and get intoxicated on. But for 85% of people, that's not the best way to get back to homeostasis or to balance. And I think CBD, as you even mentioned in the book, that is pretty much for everyone. Now, like you also mentioned, I do think even for people not using it for recreational or intoxicating purposes, I do think you still want a minuscule amount of THC to help catalyze the CBD. But I just wanted you to speak more, basically expand on everything I've just said with a focus on CBD.
Yeah, I think we're still learning how CBD works because it doesn't have the same binding mechanism that THC or delta 9 THC has to the CB1 receptor. It has more of an affinity for the CB2 receptor. And the CB2 receptors are mostly located in your immune, digestive system. So kind of think about CB1, your central nervous system kind of receptors, and then your CB2 are mostly your immune digestive body, so head and body. But the thing is, when we're consuming CBD cannabidiol, it has this affinity for the CB2 receptors and releases 2-AG. Now, if you really think about what 2-AG is doing in the body, it actually uh, helps to regulate immune response to things. So if we're taking delta 9 THC and it binds to the CB1 receptor and it gives you the exact amount that you are required for you to have the optimal expression of your own neurochemicals, so anandamide, it's expressed in the way that you need in order to modulate the systems that you need. Perfect. But if you are taking too much for you, and whatever that means for the individual, because it is an individual experience, think about us having sort of this free radical of anandamide that's floating around. So you have more than you need, and your own body, because it's so good at regulating everything, it's saying, uh-oh, we have more than we need. Now, your immune system can overreact to that again. And if you have predispositions to things like stress reactivity, PTSD, depressive states, whatever it is that you're predisposed to, it can actually turn on those switches. So now you're feeling, oh, I'm having an adverse experience. Not your typical experience where it's a vasodilator, your heart will pump faster. That's normal for everyone with delta 9 THC. But now it's a domino effect. It triggers that stressful event for you. Now, what CBD does, and it depends on the dose as well, it helps to modulate, as I said, your immune response. So if you have enough of that cannabidiol and you have enough of that 2-AG, that 2-AG can then tell your immune system, hey, it's okay, let's lower our response to that and maybe get back. I learned this terminology from daughter. She would call me from college all the time. Somebody's greening out. What do we do? Like, oh, greening out. Let me investigate that. So, but that's the adverse event that's happening sometimes in individuals because they're predisposed to that. So CBD can help modulate the response from the overactive immune response to dial it back or taper it down so it gets back into that balance. So, like, it's all done. You're absolutely right about this notion of having something that's intoxicating versus something that is not intoxicating. But it doesn't mean that even if you're consuming it, anybody can consume CBD, and it depends on what they're using it for. So you have to have a purpose behind your use. I don't believe in recreational use of any substance that is an alternating substance. So, you talked about your spiritual experience. I'm a big believer Delta 9 is psychedelic. It actually alters,
100%.
it alters your thinking in so many different ways. Now, CBD cannabidiol, and by the way, there's a whole bunch of other components to the plant, not just the cannabinoids, but also the terpenes and the flavonoids, the terpenoids and flavonoids, all these different things. They're all working in concert. But if you get the formula right, that means that the components are correct, the dose is correct for me, and I am stimulating my own endocannabinoid system to start working the way it needs to work. That's how you're consuming it correctly as a supplement. Now, sometimes you need to do more based on how your body is reacting. Sometimes you need to do less. But this combination of the two, you're supplementing for what you're naturally deficient in. But you have to understand that you have your own potholes in your road. And if you're not aware of them, you may step into that. I've had an individual, like I have so many individuals, but I use this Grandma Mary. I wrote about it in the book. It's so interesting to me how we blame this plant for doing too much, but we don't blame alcohol for drinking too much. It's just a really odd thing. But I'll give this example of story of Grandma Mary. So, a real person, not her name, but real person, living in an assisted living facility, diagnosed with cancer, and her doctor, and she was getting chemo, and she was having a really hard time with chemo. And her doctor's like, you should try some cannabis. It helps based on literature. So she went to a dispensary and talked to this bud tender. The bud tender said, try some gummies. It's a really easy way. You don't have to smoke, all that stuff. Try some gummies. Don't take more than 2. Grandma took the gummies back with her to her assisted living facility. I think she took 1.5, maybe she took 2. I don't remember. She waited. Nothing was happening for a while. And all of a sudden, it did happen. And not only did it happen, is she said she was so high, she was hallucinating. And she said she was high for 2 days. And she was saying, I'm staying away from devil's lettuce. Nobody, she was starting to tell people about it. So when she came to us through a referral, when we did her DNA test, there's a couple of things that we saw. First of all, she's a poor metabolizer of THC. So just to preface and pause there's a series of genes called cytochrome P450. So CYP450. So each one of these genes produces an enzyme that helps us metabolize something. So there's ones for lactose, there's ones for gluten, there's specific ones for phytocannabinoids. So CYP2C9 for THC, CYP2C19 is for CBD, and CYP3A4 is for CBD and THC together. So when you're consuming an isolated molecule of Delta 9, it actually goes through a different enzymatic pathway than the full plant. One of the reasons why we have different reactions, different responses to full plant versus individual components. So anyway, she's a poor metabolizer. So first pass delivery, which means it's an edible, it goes through her liver, it converts it and has a different substance that's a metabolite of that.
Delta 11, right? And it's
11,
much stronger.
It's 11-oxyhydroxide. It's a metabolite of that. So it goes through your liver and it's much stronger. You're absolutely right. It'll bind to that receptor and be a completely different experience. Number 2, she's predisposed to stress reactivity. So that gene got triggered. Number 3, she's predisposed to PTSD and slow rate of fear extinction. Slow rate of fear extinction is like our brain wants to conserve energy. So we have a trauma in our life. It takes a traumatic event, stores it in our subconscious, and it's there unless we have a neurological condition. But under great duress, it'll bring up that memory of me getting hit by a car on my bicycle when I was 9 years old. So she's dealing with all that. Now, when she did her test and we found out all this, the formulation was much different. It was much higher CBD, much lower THC, and a complete different terpene profile. And terpenes are essential oils that the plant produces. They give it smell, but they also have an effect. And the terpenes that are more aligned with her were calming terpenes and anti-inflammatory terpenes. So instead of something like limonene, which gives you a little bit of a boost of dopamine as well, it's more sedative, but not calming, not like sedative to put you to sleep, like linalool, that's also found in lavender, that's a much more calming terpene profile, and beta caryophyllene, which is found in clove and black pepper, which is anti-inflammatory. Actually, there's a really good study on beta caryophyllene working in conjunction with CBD as a great anti-inflammatory. They're using it for to help promote apoptosis in cancer cells as well. So when we discovered that and got the right formulation, Grandma Mary would walk around her where she was getting her chemo and give out our business card to people and say, hey, call these guys and do the test and take something that's more aligned with you. And this is where, sort of the secret sauce is. It's trying to maneuver and find out what works for you so you can mitigate and avoid those adverse events from happening, because when they happen, and you're going to tell everybody around there, stay away from devil's lettuce, that's based on your own negative experience that you had. I mean, that's how, propaganda gets started.
Mm-hmm. No, that really is a perfect example of exactly what I was mentioning in a more generic sense, but that's a perfect story to map onto that because, yeah, I mean, I know that people in my life that are not necessarily for it or still, apprehensive about it, especially the intoxicating aspect of it. It's like this plant is just so much more than that. And you mentioned that The Emperor Wears No Clothes was big for you, and that was also huge for me. Jack Herer, growing up conservative himself, I was brought up in like a military family, so I really resonated with his story. And I mean, even beyond what you and I are talking about, the industrial and commercial applications of this plant, it really will save the world once people just stop, let go of all the lies that you believe about it and all the misinformation and really give it an honest research, honest chance.
I don't know. Like I look at it this way: you go to a bar, and I'm not really a drinker, but you go to a bar and like everybody wants to fight, and you have this, they're drinking and they're starting. There's a different energy. Like if everybody would just consume some cannabis, I never see anybody try get into an altercation. Everybody's kind of chill and loving. So it says something about the unifying aspects of the plant as well. And you're absolutely right. I mentioned Elvie Musica. So, there's documents that are written on hemp paper, uniforms that were hemp paper. The sales and this on our, the people came to this country were made with hemp.
Yeah,
So,
and then you start to factor in that it's if you were allowed to grow it the way that it could, if it was real capitalism, let's put it like that, right? Instead of making this plant illegal to protect all the patents, paper can be made cheaper. You're preventing deforestation. You're restoring the soil. Like you mentioned, textiles, healthier for your skin, cheaper to make, like more durable. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. But when it goes to all of these industrial and commercial applications as well, it just blows my mind that it's still stigmatized in 2026.
yeah.
But yeah, like you said, 1993, you thought it was right around the corner, and
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I understand the stigma because I think that we're so conditioned about exogenous substances and we're so scared of exogenous substances because we don't understand what happens in our bodies. It's all about our own neurochemistry. Even cocaine, like we find is Schedule 2, and now cannabis is supposed to be Schedule 3, but cocaine is Schedule 2. Like our dentists use it, or it's lidocaine is used in medicine. But if we understand that when we consume cocaine and as an adult, it binds to your dopamine receptors. And by the way, I'm not advocating drugs in any way. I'm just trying to explain to people what the mechanism is, what happens in our body. So stop blaming things that are outside of us. Look at our own neurochemistry. Binds to your dopamine receptors, squirts a bunch of dopamine, and blocks the reuptake of it. So your brain's like, holy shit, it's that neurochemical is the most addictive neurochemical that we have. We squirt a bunch of dopamine, your brain is like, this is amazing. And all of a sudden, there's a reuptake of all of it. And your brain's like, oh, that was great. Sends signals. I don't have to produce dopamine. You can get it from something else. I'm going to send you a signal of get me more of that. And then, some people have impulsivity genes, they get triggered and all that stuff. So you are going to get more. And it continues on and on. And with cannabis, the difference is with using it, it doesn't permanently change your neurochemistry like some of the other opioids do as well. If you're actually taking a break, you let your receptors reset themselves and you're back to where you were. So
Right.
that's the other thing about, the dangers that they're talking about cannabis. Well, what about prescription medications? What about all these other things that actually change your neurochemistry? And while cannabis, is resetting itself.
Yeah, 100%. Have you worked with patients with autism?
Worked with a lot of patients with autism, but we're actually in the middle of a clinical study right now on autism. But I'll tell you a quick story. Did you have a specific question about autism, or was that
My
just a general?
my son has autism, and I feel strongly that cannabis will benefit him. But obviously, his mom, who is very open to cannabis, is just a little apprehensive about the formula not being being too intoxicating or just not being dialed into what's going to be best for him. And then also the form or the like, he's not going to do a tincture. He's not going to take a pill. So like, how do we get him,
Yeah.
get him to take it?
So once again, I'm not giving any medical advice. I'm just going to give you examples. I had a woman, and there's video testimonial of this I can share with you. It's on, I think it's on my Len May coaching website because we took that off the EndoDNA site. But so I had a call from a woman. We sort of know each other. I don't know her, but we know we have similar acquaintances or friends. Say, look, I'm struggling. They have two kids. Both of them are autistic or on the spectrum. And autism is there's a wide spectrum. I've neurodivergence as well, so with the ADHD. So there's a whole different spectrum of we get. But she has two kids. One of them, I don't remember the ages, 6 and 9, something like that, really close to the age, maybe 2 years apart. And one of them is more on the spectrum than the other one, but both of them have real issues with sleep, real issues with sleep. And the second one, I think, was extremely disruptive, even, violent sometimes in school. So she was really having a hard time. We did her DNA tests. We came up with a formulation, and she came back to me, left the testimonial because she goes, I got a call from school or a letter from school, some of that saying, I don't understand what's going on. First of all, she told me the kids are sleeping through the night. And I think they're doing two. They're doing a daytime and nighttime. And I'll tell you how they're implementing this. She said, whatever you're doing with the kids, goes, you have a complete different kid, not violent, calm, listens in class. They're sleeping through the night. And we've had to make a few adjustments over the last couple of years for dosing and all that stuff. But the formulation is pretty much the same. And the way that she's doing it, she's mixing it into, she's taking a tincture on oil and putting into their juice or something like that. So they're masking the flavor. It's lipid soluble. So you're drinking something that has something fat, it'll bind to that and you can't see it. So I suggested to her, maybe if you're making a smoothie with juice, take a little bit of avocado that's a natural fat or some coconut oil if you want to put in there. It'll mix and homogenize fairly well. But that's the way that she was doing it, and she had great results. Now I don't know if it's going to be those results for everyone, and it depends. But so long-winded way of answering. We worked with a lot of autistic kids with their parents, but everybody has to make the decision on their own.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We'll talk more on that, not on the podcast, but one, I guess it's a tangent from the endocannabinoid system topic. I mentioned I'm kind of a spiritual, big picture philosophy guy. My degree was in philosophy. And so when I found out about the endocannabinoid system, my immediate gut instinct was like, that just means that we literally, like humanity and this plant, are evolving together. Like you can't have one without the other almost. I just want to hear you expand on that or what you think about that idea.
Well, the plant's been part of us for thousands of years. And I look at it this way. We have an appendix. I don't know what the use of the appendix is. We've evolved with the appendix. It probably had some sort of function back in the day. That's why it's still there. Now, the endocannabinoid receptors are there. There's a lot of things that through evolution that we evolved out of that we have no use for anymore. That's why I bring up the appendix. But the cannabinoid receptors are part of us. So this plant was part of our evolution, and not only part of our evolution, but part of our history through the ages, because it didn't evolve. We didn't evolve out of the need for those receptors. They're still there. They're still there for a reason. Even through prohibition, even from nothing changed, the receptors are still there. And we still have endogenous endocannabinoids. So there is a true reason why, this plant was part of us, because we have receptors for this plant, and there's a symbiotic relationship between us and the plant. So yeah, I think it's there for a purpose.
Yeah, 100%. And then the last piece I wanted to talk on, and this might go on a little bit longer than that last piece, but we were talking yesterday about epigenetics, and so I just want to hear your thoughts on this full picture dynamic between the cannabis genome and then the human genome, but then also our lifestyle and the way that we see the world and the way that we make choices in the world, and how that can affect our genetic expression or the way that the genes express themselves, and then also how does that affect the interaction with any sort of cannabis genetics.
Yeah, I think it's important for us to actually explain genetics to people, and so they kind of get a sense of what does it mean. So we're born, we get our half our genes from our father, half from our mother. But the thing that I always hear from people, I just talked to a doctor earlier today. She was like, "Oh yeah, it's genetic," and I'm like, "Yeah, but it's not epigenetic. You can change that." So this is why I think it's important for people to understand. And I like to use this example of a circuit breaker. So we're born and we have the encoding in our genes. Some of that is in our circuit breaker are turned on. Those circuit breakers are turned on. So things like our hair color, eye color, skin color, things of that nature are turned on. Now, the other genetic predispositions, the encoding that we have, we get to regulate that based on lifestyle choices. So some of those lifestyle choices, first ones are food, like what nutrients, how do we nourish ourselves, what food we put into our bodies, and how are we getting our minerals or our vitamins. Some of them are essential. Some of them are we can't produce ourselves, but we need to make sure that we ingest those. So we have to get them from, food and all the other things that we consume. And they will help trigger the epigenetic expression. So when the messenger RNA goes to the cell, it tells that cell to create certain proteins, and those proteins will then express that encoding from the gene. So the second thing is things like what we expose ourselves to, um, like heavy metals, pesticides, all these other things are, some people say microplastics, possibly. So all these different things that we ingest, they also help to modulate epigenetic expressions, turning those circuit breaker switches on. And the third one that I think most people don't think about is our own neurochemistry. So I gave that example of that cortisol or other neurochemicals are pumped in our bloodstream, and those neurochemicals help to modulate the epigenetic expression as well. Well, going into what you were mentioning about the endocannabinoid system and phytocannabinoids and how you can have these different experiences, it has to do a lot with our own neurochemistry. And if we have predispositions that we're releasing certain neurochemicals to have a certain effect, like, we talked about stress or anxiety or that feeling of anxiety, or on the flip side, having depressive state, feeling down, or having these mood expressions, they'll have to do with our own neurochemistry as well. So having those neurochemicals pumped in our bloodstream based on what we're genetically predisposed to, that'll help to regulate how we actually consume the plant. And when we consume the plant, what our potholes are in our own road. So I use this example a lot about this GPS unit, but it's a really important thing for people to understand is you're not locked into your genome, but you have to know your own genome because you have to know your own GPS. So I live in LA, I live in Los Angeles, I'm from Philly, I can get in my car, I can drive from LA to Philadelphia, and I'm going to get lost most likely. I'm going to hit some, construction, some traffic jams, all these different things. I'm going to get there eventually at a cost. It's going to cost, maybe it took me more time, whatever. Now, if I put in my location in my GPS, it'll tell me these are the roads to avoid, or this is where the traffic jam is. So getting ahead of these things, that's your life's GPS. Your DNA is your life's GPS. You know where your roads may be congested. You know where your potholes are. So now that you know this, you can navigate around those sharp edges of those potholes, especially if whatever you're putting in your body, phytocannabinoids are just part of that. I had a podcast earlier today. I was on, and this guy was saying, bipolar disorder runs my family, so we've been avoiding marijuana for years because it's associated with the psychosis. And I said, well, how do you know that you have this genetic predisposition? Well, it runs in my family. Well, you got recessive genes. Doesn't mean you have it. It runs in your family. And first of all, second of all, just because you have a genetic predisposition, something that's not going to trigger it, but it's not only cannabis. If you're predisposed to psychosis, there's 1,000 different things that can trigger that epigenetic expression, not just that. And if you know this, it's a wonderful thing because now you can mitigate the expression by changing your dose, changing your formulation, changing your method of consumption, all these things. So just having that knowledge and understanding of what you're predisposed to will allow you to hopefully mitigate and prevent some of these adverse responses.
Man, I just want to thank you again for coming on the podcast. I just want to, final question. Where can people find you if they are interested in getting a DNA test and getting your recommendations for formulation?
Yeah, so our website is EndoDNA, ENDODNA.com. I also have a coaching website. It's called Len May Coaching. Released a new book, nothing to do with cannabis, there is a chapter on the endocannabinoid system. It's called Jack of all trades, master of some. It's the connection between ADHD and polymathy. So it's about leaning into your superpower of ADHD. If you use it correctly, I'd say 3/4 of the billionaires in this world are neurodivergent in some way, and they learn how to lean into that. So that's what the book is about. So if you want to get my new book, besides the book that you mentioned already, which I'm grateful for, it's called Jack of all trades, master of some. So, and I'm all social under Len May. I think Instagram is Len May DNA, but if you type my name, it's 6 letters, pretty easy to find. I'm pretty responsive.
Well, once again, thank you, Len, and I'm sure I'll be in touch with you, sending people your way.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
My move in silence, though the smoke is loud. I slow, but I'm trying to get them woke right now. It's a whole lot of folks trying to cope right now. And I'm trying to give them hold up with the dope light. Now you got the fix for the road life now. I read these lyrics for your soul right now. Hey, you know the stilo. Spread out the vibe and raise it to people. Quit selling these lies and praising what's evil. Quit freedom from vices, the pain is so deep. So when we busy dying, it's time you should know. You was designed with a mind full of gold, but a mind on the doorstep, a mind full of goals. Blinded by woes, so our minds are closed all the while. This life is beautiful, beautiful, eh? I'm gonna get through to you, eh? I change, I cannot afford to stay the same. So many hate like you, got that inside, enough for the pain. You know that ain't right. Love yourself and protect your mind. So many only ain't the survival.